Are we live? Here's the thing. Hold on, let me start over. In the days since the second indictment was unsealed, and even leading up to the hours of the dawn of Arraignment Day, the double-barrel echo chamber of ideological cacophony of noise, as I like to call it, has been reverberating and sort of augmenting, broadcasting, quite focusing on, obsessive-compulsively focusing on the escalating rhetoric coming out of the most adamant of adamant defenders of Donald Trump. And some of that commentary, not from everyone, but from a few leading voices, and of course, roaring up from the tumultuous, disparate, interconnected different groups that form that 1/3 of the Republican base. Or is it 2/3? I forget which the ratio is, but this notion of political warfare and, boiling it down to an eye for an eye at this point because of how extremely paranoidly and quite easily verifiably falsely Trump has framed his situation. And here's the thing about that saying, my friends. An eye for an eye is an analogy for life. And the first one leaves the whole world blind, and the second will lead to unnameable horrors that may lead us right down the path towards extinction. And that's unimaginable, right? Like cuckoo chaos, crazy. Not that I'm calling anyone names. I'm not. I'm saying the idea of taking that concept literally, when the point of it is a warning not to crave infinite, vicious, toxic circles of of vengeance and revenge, right? Like, that's the point of the saying. It's the tragedy and or the maliciousness of those public leaders with a pedestal or a, bully pulpit from which to preach that are abdicating for any kind of rhetorical invocation of these kinds of provocative statements. And that's just downright beyond irresponsible. It's un-American, flat out. Especially if, given the preponderance of actual fact-based evidence, he did the crimes he probably did. It will probably be found guilty in a court of law. Of course, there's a lot to discuss here on the crack of Indictment Day dawn, the dawning of the morning of, not Indictment Day, that was whenever it was unsealed, and I'm sure with something that will be jokingly celebrated on the internet for years to come. Greetings, salutations, I'm your host, and this is today's episode of GMT, a Tuesday, June 13th, 4:20 a.m., right on the dot. Thank you for joining me, friends. Let's fire things up. Sorry, that was really loud. I hope that didn't ping your ears too hard. I wish I could edit that out. It's too late now. Let me fire up the old intro. Good morning, Trumptopia. A special segment of the almost daily Zencast. Hosted by the incorrigible Mr. Zappa. Let's talk Trump. Before we start, allow me to play you something that I captured for myself because it just came in my head, and sorry, that came out worse than I meant to. This thought blossomed in the auditorium of my mind. And I knew if I didn't hit record and verbalize it, it'd be gone forever. So I don't even remember exactly how I phrased it. But here we go. Let me just play this for you to kick off the show, and then we'll talk about what's in the indictment and what's really going on in terms of stakes and risks and, sort of like the big cliffhangers of the debt ceiling and, previous government shutdown sort of debacle. There's a lot more going on that is, probably obvious or immediate to the first initial blush glance. But here we go. Let me push play on this thing. We have more in common, you and I, dear listener, than you may at first glance realize or care to take into consideration. But do not let that stop you from joining me in a deep, co-creative, mutual exploration of each other's inner worlds and the collective consciousness of our brethren and sisters. Ooh, that's awkwardly phrased. We'll fix it in post. Okay, together, a journey into the collective minds and histories and future responsibilities of the very thing we all share in root common: being alive in the present tense, here and now. Right. Some of you are like, what does that have to do with Donald Trump and his legal woes? And trust me, friends, I will bring a full circle. For those of you who are new, you may not quite see it right away. For you long-term listeners, especially those of you who've been really putting the pins on the corkboard, asterisks, that's a gimmick in the show. And I don't mean gimmick as in cheesy thing that's throwaway and meaningless, but rather like a tool. It's a mental jerry-rigging of a sort of, mnemonic device to sort of aggregate thoughts over many episodes and the broad expanse of time over which we've been having these discussions, that I've been recording these sessions. Thank you for joining me. So, friends, we really truly are sitting in a historical moment of historical epic proportions. One that will indeed shape and or reshape and could potentially, in the most extremist and I don't mean to be alarmist in any way, shape, or form. I'm not of that ilk. In fact, I'm all about closing the portals to the craziest of the would-be possible timeline potentials before they even come into manifest. Right? Like, why vote for something crazy in your mind? But pin on the corkboard. Things that may seem way out of context. As has been pointed out by many a talking head and conspiracy theorist, supporter of Trump and otherwise, this is an unprecedented moment in which it is the first time, almost kind of, maybe not exactly, in American history that a president has been under an indictment hold on. Erase. Back it up. He isn't a president. He's a former president, right? And let's be really, 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 really clear. No amount of believing in Trump's lies will make them true. Especially any of the ones that he didn't even really weave himself. For there are Trump lies that he did not make up. He just wink, wink, nudge, nudge, flaps along and doesn't debunk them, doesn't call them out, doesn't acknowledge them, just sort of lets you project them right onto him. And that's one of the most alarming things about him as a dubious individual, that those of us who've never quite ever been able to trust him and or accept him as someone that is even remotely fit for being in political office to begin with, and that thought so from day one, from the moment he threw the hat in the ring, not because someone told us, no one told me to think this, friends, but because I was well aware of him and who he was and a lot of his own self-aggrandizing, cuckoo crazy statements that he's made before. And forgive me, it's the one time that I get really sort of like even flirt close to calling anybody names. I'm really against that, right? Especially when people come at me calling me all kinds of silly names on the interweb. It's like, if that's all you got, great. Have fun calling me names. You haven't changed my mind about where I think the facts are, and you haven't debunked any facts. Pin on the corkboard. Also, I wish I should just pin that on my Facebook page. And oh, no, more so on my Instagram. You should see this ongoing diatribe. But anyways, I digress. I want to reel it back a bit. I don't hate Trump. I don't have it out for Trump because someone told me to have it out for Trump. And as you'll see, if you join me in a journey back through time and the real-time commentary I've laid out in the plethora of many episodes that you will find in now their own special page, organized nice and tidy in chronological order. Warning, some are missing. And some of the earliest instances of me sort of working on the idea were actually on video and not in audio form. It's like there were some recordings from before the days of even being on the Sprecher account. And then there's some episodes that were sort of misplaced while reorganizing the original layout of the Sprecher account in the very earliest days of being on this platform. Some of which were sort of lost because I deleted a couple things. I deleted a folder somewhere along the way that I didn't mean to. It had some unsorted stuff because I was sort of like drowning in files, and it may be some of the earliest of me commenting my critical analysis of when Trump announced. Right, he announced he came down the escalator in front of a bunch of, and I know I harp on this all the time. Sorry, friends, but it's a fact. It was a mob of not standing enthusiasts of Trump, but sort of curious people, and I think a bunch of hired extras. I believe that is actually true. If I'm wrong about that, I apologize. And I guess I could fact check that. I should fact check myself a little harder. But do you see how easy it is? But whether or not, let's set that aside. Let's say that there are two parallel universes, right? One in which he came down the escalator and there was a thronging crowd of really genuine, authentic, pre-existing Donald Trump enthusiasts, probably all activated from his days on his titular reality television show. So many pins on the corkboard asterisks about that show that we've already talked about on the podcast before that I don't want to get into because it'll just slow us down from getting to the point of this episode. There comes a time in the popular arc of any president, and like any controversial president, and let's remember, American history there's wiggle room for debate, but there's also a good plenty of huge swathy chunks of it that like cannot be denied are just facts, right? Easily verifiable and confirmed in terms of contemporary record keeping, etc. And up to and including legal records, right? So, if I may invoke a quote that I believe and bless my heart and forgive me if this happens to be a not real quote of Theodore Roosevelt's, and even should by some fluke of nature, it is erroneous. I don't think it is, though. Something echoes in my mind of like having heard this a long time ago, long before the current incident would warrant referencing it. Allow me to quote what I do believe is the Meowdy Mouth number president, Theodore Roosevelt of America. Quote, patriotism means to stand by the... I don't know what number he is, okay? That's all that means. I don't remember which... I could look it up, but it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. If... Forgive me. Let's take the quote again. Quote, to quote Theodore Roosevelt, the umpteenth president, insert number here later, of the United States of America, quote, patriotism means to stand by the country. We could really just stop there and trust there in the greater popular wisdom, the much touted great common sense of the great American intellect, and hope that a liberal, and I don't mean liberal in terms of being leftist or any other ism, but rather freely flowing usage of critical thinking would do the rest. But rest assured, there's more of a quote, so we do not have to rely on that alone. Because as we can see, we've driven ourselves into so many weird bifurcated silos of echoing, mutually echo-canceling wedge issues of mutually assured intellectual antler locking. Patent pending on that phrase. Somebody clip that and remind me to write that down and send it to the dictionary people. I want to make that a word. And at the end of the definition, coined by the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. I almost got my own name wrong. None of that is Theodore Roosevelt. That was just me just jumping off the rails there. But thank you for following along. That was a pretty dope crafting of some wordsmithing there. And I stand by whatever it is I just said because I think it was dope. And I hope you understood what I meant by it because I chose my words oh so carefully. Let us reorient on the beginning and follow through on the rest of this quote. Quote, patriotism means to stand by the country. It does not mean to stand by the president or any other political public office, save exactly... Oh, sorry, I misread that. It does not mean to stand by the president or any other public official, save exactly to the degree in which he, and I'm adding here postmodernly, or she, him and or herself, stands by the country. Now we could stop there and agree amongst ourselves, each other, as community of communities, as a union, imperfect and ever striving towards a better, more perfect union of these many peoples that are the 50 great states. We could agree that that's enough to understand that it's time to just slough off, the old Trump train. Like, let's all kind of get off this thing, off this bandwagon, because it ain't the right bandwagon to be on. For the moral good, for the correct and true, just, right, true American way of we're trying to figure this out. Yeah, the corruption creeps in, so we do our best to prune it by means civil and civilized and according to the best of the law, and that includes the law itself, and that no one is above the law and no law is above the law, which is something we forget sometimes, and we should add if it's not officially part of the paperwork, I would argue. Again, extemporizing inspired by what Theodore arguably himself, perhaps some skeletons in the closet, or some problematic statements, or some problematic issues himself. But I think here he speaks to the burning spirit that is truth. For I don't think truth is one hard, glassy object, but a burning frond of passion that must be understood, will burn away that which is not truth. And that's one way to put it, isn't it? I quote. Let's recap the quote, just so we can say it again, kind of clear, kind of loud for people in the back. Patriotism means to stand by the country. It does not mean to stand by the president or any other public official, save exactly to the degree in which he himself stands by the country. It is patriotic to support him insofar as he efficiently serves the country. It is unpatriotic not to oppose him to the exact extent that by inefficiency or otherwise he fails in his duty to stand by the country. According to my citation, President Theodore Roosevelt is quoted as saying that or writing that somewhere in the year of our Lord 1918. It's 1923. No, it's 2023. And here we are in a political calamity of almost circus, Las Vegas-y sort of like exaggerated crazy, not calling people crazy, but like the extenuating circumstances of like, this is the stuff of political satire, action, adventure, fiction, right? If it weren't so like wild, it's happening right there. Dear friends, let us remember the words of Theodore Roosevelt, and let us remind our brothers and sisters who are obsessed and or fixated and or so enamored and or in love with dear old Donald, whatever the J stands for, Trump. And let me tell you, it does not stand for Jesus Christ. I cannot begin to recite the litany of reasons why I would literally, intellectually posit to you and anyone who would be so bold as to take this and consider it for 1 hot minute. If Jesus Christ himself, Yeshua, the Christos, were to, appear riding upon his golden chariot, the Merkaba, chariot of light, of his full chakra system activated, his body avatar capable of materializing and dematerializing back and forth from the states of being in full physical flesh form and the irradiated living holographic light that is what he references in the Bible there when he talks about opening your third eye. Damn it, I always forget the numbers. Is it Matthew? Yeah, those numbers, man, they always just fall away from my vocabulary file. But I've made the memes and shared it and posted about it before. And whenever I do comment on it at someone, I do try to look it up because it is easy to find. I don't think he would, if he were here right now, I don't think he would be a Trump voter, folks. I don't think he would be waving that banner that claims, I don't think he would be resharing the meme, Donald J. Trump, the last great white hope for American Christianity. Like I think he would be speaking to you, looking you dead in the eye, each and every one of you who calls yourself a believer in, a follower of, a fear of the dear Lord and his son, Jesus Christ. and asking you, how can you support that man and invoke my name along, in the process? Given the insurmountable amount of evidence that he is not in any way, shape, or form fighting for the little guy as he claims to be, that he is not in any way, shape, or form a really good Christian, as he sometimes sort of, not very often, because he doesn't even care about that much. If you think about it, if you really look at that hard, he kind of said it the one time because of the photo op where he had the Bible upside down. And he also flashes that New World Order devil's hand signal all the time, that if you believe in the conspiracy theory content, not saying that I do, asking the what if and reminding my friends who don't, that need to deal with this with the people who do, that, if you do believe in any of the spectrum of that conspiracy theory content that says all the Democrats are devil worshipping, baby eating, lizard, whatever they are, robots, or just plain old Jesus hating, bad people that believe in Satan and hell for some reason, he flashes the same hand signs all the time while talking and giving his speeches. It is time to step away from the blind faith personal allegiance to this man, because we're supposed to be in an experiment of, being a democratic republic that exercises a living, breathing, ever striving to be better, vote-driven system of justice, and democracy, right? And some people would laugh at that. And, there's a Venn diagram of Venn diagrams there of all kinds of words, some of them beginning with anti, etc. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the fact-based indictment that was unsealed just days ago, and the simple reality that no matter how you slice it, today at 3 p.m., I think Eastern Standard Time, right? Because it's in Florida. Whatever time that's going to be today on Pacific Standard Time. I don't have the world clock in front of me to do the math in clock hours math time, but we'll be keeping an eye on it and jumping back on the air to discuss it, friends. But of course, innocent until proven guilty. Pin on the corkboard. I always have agreed to that. You know what goes right next to innocent until proven guilty? Investigate any reasonable case where there seems to be enough, initial evidence and real smoke is attached to real fire. That's a pin on. That's in real life. Those are two things that should be sort of always kept in mind together. And kind of spinning here, weaving some gold magic of my own wordsmithy, I would propose to you, my dear friends, my dear brothers and sisters in the experiment that is America, and in the experiment that is being human beings alive on this planet and dealing with each other and all of this shenanigans that we call the day-to-day grind of as the world turns, of everyday popular current events, of epic political economic significance. We must remain vigilant and refuse the normalization of the weaponization of hyperbolic and patently false accusations for the purposes of getting away with and retaining the abuse of political power. I think everyone could agree with that, right? Let us hope that we could, in actuality, moving forward. As it is, it's an epic, crazy historical day, and we are going to cleanse the palate. But I got to say this, friends, 29 minutes and 40 seconds into the podcast, I've read the indictment. I've taken my time. My very first glance was a sort of interesting skimming, a survey of what my eyes could pick up and what phrasing might catch my attention. And I did it backwards from the very end, from the last page to the front. And then I, kicked back and just sort of like sporadically read the thing through with many breaks. It is long and it is, densely packed. But it is simple and straightforward. Presuming a fundamental reality remains true. And that's that these kinds of indictments at this level aren't brought forward and taken to a court of law if the prosecutorial team, the team of prosecutors involved, don't have the goods, don't have the receipts, don't have the facts and evidence and testimony and eyewitness accounts in hand to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the need to no longer presume innocent because they have been proven guilty in a court of law and proceed with criminal, incarceration. Excuse me, I got the hiccups and the reflux and all that going. Presuming that turns out to be accurate, and some of the statistical things, it is incredibly likely, right? And this should be obvious to anyone that applies genuine general knowledge of history and the realities of the American system, and that we are a nation of laws, and the court cases are court cases. History and precedents are all there laying around to be reviewed, and that while interpretation and the weird argumentation of how to interpret things are one thing, the manipulation of that sort of stuff is irrelevant, right? And that the Republican side of things, of the echo chamber, for it is an echo chamber, is generally speaking, in all earnestness, historically speaking, more fraught with a tendency collectively to do that sort of thing. And that Trump, being very much like this cycle's, if this generation's like biological roulette, random reshuffling, and re-expressing of the Nixon. Oh, what was Nixon's vice president? Not Ford, the other one. With the one with the goofy name. Agnew. Spyro, literally like the video game. I poop you not, my dear listeners. Spyro Gyro. No, Spiro. Who would have known that was a real name from somewhere? Yeah, if it's on one guy, if one person shows up in history and has been, elected official of some kind and been in the news and whatnot, then odds are that name is been used enough that it got handed down through generations and, was part of some family memory and usage, and general usage enough that it exists in the world. Spyro Theodore Agnew, 39th Vice President of these great grand United States, served from 69 and had to resign in 73. I'm sure there's probably documentaries. Somebody did some, I'm sure there's podcasts. Anyways, go do your own attempts to, that confirm. But that's what it strikes me as. From my own, living memory of my own, brush readings of that history growing up in the shadow of it, as an observer of them, and often, satirical questionnaire and, provocative satirist of American politics, arguably, quite intuitively, since very early childhood. Because, since Ronald Reagan is in office, I've been asking extremely snarky questions about American politics. Not the least of which, is it really that easy for a movie actor and commercial spokesperson for cigarettes to just sort of become the president of the United States of America without any other previous experience running things and or, the law and or history, other than was, whatever was commonplace learning in the education system of ye olde ancient times. Not to say I hated him. I did not. I hate no one, friends. I just wonder why anyone can continue to support any politician once a certain threshold has been crossed. Now, many people presume the craziest and most irrational things about me and my background and where I'm coming from and my belief systems, which is why I've made an effort to document them and express them and connect them to some of my other endeavors, not the least of which is my own sci-fi action adventure literary book series that does draw and deep and weird and wide inspiration from real life to the point of almost calling it like Americana fan fiction. Historical future science revisionist would-beism of history. There's another new genre name for you. Join me in some of that. You can give yourself a self-guided tour of the Zeppoverse by visiting solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. Thank you for your patience. Let's cleanse the palate, right? Let's play a little bit of DJ Zed music. Here's the Dank Darkness Underground Express. We'll be right back to hit a few highlights from the indictment itself and talk about facts and realities about our current situation. Don't take my word for it. As always, friends, go do your own investigation. And remember that there are two wings for every one bird. So we must take a grain of salt with everybody's hyperbolic and hyperpolarized opinion and reinterpretation of what it sounds like what's going on. But more of that on the other side of this track. In the meantime, by all means, feel free to use this time to get up and boogie woogie. Shake those bones and enjoy the music on the dance floor if you got a little square of your own to get it wiggling. Go ahead. And if you don't, just kick back and visualize yourself doing so in some lush, smoke-filled but safe for your lungs, lounge of your favorite design aesthetic liking. It sure is one wild roller coaster of history, and it sure is stressful at times, but we can resiliently get through it, folks, if we resolutely agree to actual application of critical thinking. We can hear everybody's points of view out, right? But then we must turn to the measurable and the verifiable, right? And we must remind ourselves and each other that everyone's perspective may allow for some wide-ranging wiggle room of disagreement on what those things are. And that's okay on initial get-go. We must never, and I say this in light of the simple reality that there is much concern, much hubbub, and much fear-mongering, and there literally are folks over there in Trumptopia speaking of things in heightened and hyperbolic terms, loaded enough to be considered incendiary and provocative. Somehow, in quite the un-American way, for this particular man that with any critical lens of reasoning from long before he announced, from his history of, business interactions with others, can be seen as a sort of disrespectful, bravado-driven, self-aggrandizing kind of guy that has little respect for others and reality itself. Like, facts mean next to nothing as long as he can sell himself and I guess presumably profit. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with profit, especially not in the abstract and its most neutral terminology. But profiteering is not okay. That is the immoral version, the toxic version of the benign and neutral definition of the word profit. And I don't know what to other end one steals hundreds of boxes that do not belong to them, then lies about it in various ways repeatedly, and also gets caught on tape bragging about it, while simultaneously, and this is, listen, I'm neither shocked nor surprised at this point. As I say, not because anyone in the media has told me to feel a certain way about Donald Trump. In fact, I think I would argue I've been ahead of the curve in my own assessment and analysis. And my podcast sits in living proof audio track record of it, except for tragically any of the missing episodes that got lost of my own stupid doing. But neither here nor there. Setting aside all the extreme variables, which we can sort of safely rule out as being most extremely unlikely, which I will point out, these have been things I've talked about in real time during the show. Like, for example, one extreme variable we can safely rule out in terms of you and I, dear audience, agreeing, and in terms of the broadest public discourse. I think if you and I, whoever you are, dear listener, if you and I can agree to the following, then I think so could most everyone else in these great, grand 50 United States of ours. Ultimately, if we really take the time to do the rounds and express ourselves and hear each other out, but also come back to go, okay, then let's have it confirmed and checked. Donald Trump is not Saint Bernard, nor is he Jesus Christ in some new body. Absurdities. Donald Trump is Donald Trump, and he is a human being. And there might be, indeed, as I am inclined to think, and I believe I've achieved this conclusion on a critical thinking basis, not on a blind faith basis, that if we are human and alive, then we have soul and spirit, and that's why there are religions. And while we can safely rule out a lot of the claims and blind faith assertions of any and all organized religions when it comes to this discussion. And I don't just say that to say that, put a pin on the cork, but we got to come full circle. It's one of the dangerous dark sides of all of this in terms of the historical moment that we sit in, right? Because he does not. Neither does the party, which is my primary beef. Not as an atheist, but as a someone who would call, who would say to you if we met, at a bar, at a restaurant, in line at the bank, or at a church. I'm one who was once Christian, and now probably cannot abide that term because it's too loaded and been hijacked and taken too far astray from that which the words of Christ compel us to be doing. pins on the corkboard. Plenty of that has been discussed on the podcast before. But separation of church and state must be recognized and acknowledged, and I am able to do that, eliminating some of the other more extreme variables out there, dear friends, including that that all Democrats are either lizard people from Mars or baby-eating demons from the very darkest, dankest pits of hell. We come to the conclusion that human beings are human beings. There's problematic issues and corruptions on all sides, and all of that must be held account through the cyclical rituals of voting them out, and or revising the system as it exists in a sane and civilized manner. Otherwise, what is civilization? And that it most certainly isn't supposed to be whatever this clown show of hyperbolic, exaggerated, demagogic, ideological, false narrative weaving, false weaponization of false accusations and intimations of completely irrational and deeply morbidly toxic, hijacked, pseudo-religious connotations. And again, I'll repeat this. I don't say Trumptopian to be rude. I say Trumptopian to be precise and analytical, like a wordsmith, I'm not a scientist by any lettering after my name or anything, but I like to think that the scientific method can be applied by anyone, and then actual scientists can go over it and work on it and refine it and refute it. But if I were to be an anthropologist, and in my science fiction literary Zeppoverse book series, I do indeed create characters of some future 10th generation who are cultural, political, sociopolitical anthropologists looking back upon us in our living moment of here and now today, making commentary about some of that stuff. Although none of those chapters have dropped yet because those are all still in the fledgling stages and being like real-time events being too many, too wild and too roller coaster crazy to keep up with, to get, to really capture them all and integrate them. I need a faster, more dynamic workflow for my literature world building project. And thus the podcast in its sort of newly reimagined version 4.2.0. And that is a joke. That is an inside joke. Okay, so friends, let me get back to a statement I'm trying to make. Okay, all things being fair and equal, a little corruption on all sides, so we got to investigate in all directions. Let's remind our brothers and sisters over there on whatever event. There's a bunch of circles in a really crowded and very sloppy and not very well organized Venn diagram of way too many competing, yet extremely ironically, somewhat curiously, very self-similar ideologies over there in the big tent that is the grand old party of the Republican ideologosphere of, post-Trump topian conversion of republicanism, of post-Reagan republicanism. Okay? Now, for context, folks, and we'll get back to the indictment situation in one hot second. Reagan had his issues, but he also did some good things. Mixed bag. And he also used to sell cigarettes on TV. So maybe if I had been, and in the literary Zeppoverse, my character of the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo indeed was, in some form or fashion, a little-known underground political commentator, in a whole like revisionist sci-fi action-adventure retro history of imagine a Reaganite dystopia, near dystopia, that is reimagined to sort of even more comically highlight the realities we're living today. And it wouldn't take much because crazy things were said. And Spiro Agnew was Spiro Agnew. And Trump is indeed very much sounding like some crazy next generation supervillain, as if the human genome, pin on the corkboard, friends, about the human genome, and the metaphysics one might extrapolate in directions hitherto unexpected and some might argue unwarranted, but I say very applicable. What? You may be, what the effing? You might be some audience members, especially any new ones, especially any new audience, and I say this with love and respect and disarming waves of compassionate grooviness. Anyone who wandered into my podcast with a lot of preloaded assumptions that they were pulling back the ribbon or the slingshot on to try to poke my eyes out with them. Slow your roll, friends. If the human genome occasionally expresses some political, expression of what this Trumptopian phenomena is, I would posit to you, that it takes us down a dangerous spirally path towards, some sort of proto-modern, inherently two-faced, self-exposing, flip-floppingly, like, hypocritical, hoisted on one's own petard, violence-prone, quite like blatantly violence-prone, brutality-driven tribalism that would be approaching in a science fiction dystopian kind of way a rivaling status of dark ages rivaling toppling record-breaking human carnage of, pardon the pun, inherent in borrowing that language, of sort of dystopic political fraudulent life parodying itself dark ages type situation. I don't even know how to end that sentence other than to say that a chapter of living in some episode of human self-oppression and self-abuse and toxic self-mutilation, as was expressed quite literally for a disordinately and depressingly long duration period of time, as what it is that we commonly call the Dark Ages. And many young people may not understand, for they have not probed deeply enough the cruel, dark realities of the historical facts of that dystopian nightmare, because it was a top-down, dictatorial, religious tyranny of truly just mind-boggling proportions, in which the most brutal and obscene things were perpetuated upon hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of innocent people in the name of divine might, ordained by God, sanctioned and some would argue, explicitly planned and executed by Christ himself as mover of the world's actions. And no one in their right mind should want that, in my honest to God, honest opinion, right? Like, no one should want that which Monty Python mocks and ridicules in the Holy Grail to be what happens, but in a postmodern, post-industrial, post-cyberizational sort of reality, driven by the ideology that we find being expressed and sort of woven together by the words and actions of Donald J. Trump, and the additional sort of second tier commentary content, or additional sort of, some might even say borderline heretical, apocryphal content being aggregated to the growing mythology and mythos of the man that and legend that he's sort of has been, is becoming, or maybe. But some hard reminders, right? Like, to the best of my understanding, and I think this can be confirmed if one were to go out and invest and really investigate and interview and ask the right, appropriate, deep, probative questions of all those actually involved. I don't have the budget to do that, but maybe someday I will build that community, friends. And if I'm wrong, I apologize. But I cannot blindly believe that Joe Biden directly is responsible for Donald Trump's indictment, right? Is it possible? It's just plausible enough, right? I mean, especially if you already live in the world of plausible things taken on blind faith that come out of, the dogmatic interpretation of the quite fascinating, sometimes unbelievable content in the Bible. And there are so many asterisks and so many pins on the corkboard there, friends. And do not miss the deep dive episodes over in the UER special segment show container of the Almost Daily Zencast. Because to put it simply, we cannot even really have the discussion unless certain things are previewed and reviewed by everyone that would want to engage in the debate and agreed upon. And to put a clearer, more specific point on it, because I get some Bible thumpers coming at me, especially Bible thumpers that defend Donald Trump, and they want a Bible thump. And I'm like, whoa, slow your roll. First of all, if you want a Bible thump, back up and let's discuss this. Have you read it in the original Aramaic? Because if you haven't, you don't even know what you're thumping, and you don't even know what you're arguing. Go back and read that, and then we can talk. And that's meaningful. Pin on the corkboard, as it's been discussed in the episode before. I don't think that the DNC caused this, right? I'm not seeing any evidence. And if the subcommittees and the Republicans in Congress really do believe that this is so, let them bring forth concrete evidence, as concrete as the evidence that is presented in this indictment against Donald Trump and his personal valet, Walt Nauta. Nauta? I'm not really sure how to pronounce his last name, and I don't mean to make light of it. It's just a really weird, interesting spelling. And here's something that I'm fairly certain that can be verified. Like, right? There's probably some time frame of respecting the grand jury, but I'm sure that history and the historians and now there's a whole great grand argument there. Pins on the corkboard, discussed before, caveats et al. To be had. Pins on the corkboard. Not going to get into it now. But the grand jury was impaneled, and the evidence was presented by those who had done the investigation, real research, right? And then that includes a genuine and authentic understanding of the law. Because I don't care how many times, and this is critical and it goes central to everything. It's in the indictment, it's central to an understanding of the indictment, and it's central to an understanding of the way Trump operates. And forgive me, this will get dismissed. People who don't want to understand this will just axiomatically, knee-jerkedly dismiss this as a fake news leftist talking point. But to the best of my understanding, I'm here to assert to you, I believe this is true, and I believe that you can go dig up the appropriate laws in relationship to this and read this and understand it to also be true. But the Presidential Records Act does not condone or authorize or say any of the things that Trump implies and sort of suggests that it does, because when he keeps referencing it over and over and over again, he's lying. He lies by saying things that sound plausible but are verifiably untrue, and he says them emphatically and casually and as if they are to be taken for granted over and over and over again. And he relies on his audience not checking. Just like he said things about the Mueller report that were categorically untrue, that if you'd read the report, you would be like, oh, wow, yeah, no, this sentence that Trump said over and over again, what's that word he kept using in particular? Exonerated? False. Categorically not a true statement. Not one way. There's no way to butter that bread and make it fall down upside down that way with that. Nothing in that report. And nothing in that report even the word was not used, and nothing in it added up to that conclusion. For anyone who understands some fundamentals of the law with its problematic issues and the things that need reforming, and all the caveats involved, and history and provenance and of historical precedent, right? Just not true. He was not exonerated by the Mueller report in any way, shape, or form. What did happen was that the Republican Party voted against kicking him out of office, as they shoulda, woulda, coulda done if they had been patriotic and true to the country, instead of weirdly, blind-faithedly loyal to the one man who was behaving in not only suspicious, but eventually provenly corrupt manners, and has had a lifelong history of doing so. Not because the TV people, the big bad commercial, news outlets that supposedly hate him. No, because of the facts of reality, of which, as highlighted in a recent episode, there's been plenty of cases in the court of law about already. Right? Not the least of which is that his foundations and charitable places where he asks people to give him money were shown to be fraudulent. On one occasion is enough. Shame on you. You can't be in office and take people's money. If you have a big, giant, multi-million-dollar charity in which you lie to people, take their money, line your own pocket, do things with the money that have nothing to do with the charity, and are rendered and justly, correctly, based on the facts, called out in court to be, found to be in a court of law to be fraudulent. Okay. Don't get me wrong. Saying all of that doesn't mean I'm blind, faithfully defending anyone else, on any quarter, in any camp, in any political party. From the days of our earliest aggregation into city-states and the invention of politics, there has been political corruption, friends. So much so that it is a mainstay of our own pop cultural entertainment. So, there's the everlasting tug of war of holding those who turn towards corruption accountable. And the argument back and forth against those who pretend to be uncorruptible but are indeed two-facedly corrupt. And the rest of us who just trying to get by, trying to call strikes, and balls, to borrow from sports analogy, right? So my question has been, from the get-go, dear GOP, stop sable rattling, stop bending over backwards for a guy we shouldn't have even allowed get elected in the first place. And I don't mean in a dictatorial way. I mean in the collective responsibility of we should have all voted better kind of way. It's plain as simple as that. Either we fix the system or we redesign a completely new system without murdering each other for an extended period of time in sanctioned civil war, which would be just painfully absurd to no end. And an unnecessary chapter in history that does not need repeating, I would argue. But hey, some people spend all their day on the internet calling me crazy. You decide. Thank you for joining me, friends. I remind you, innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. But if you read the indictment, and I could, we could do a whole breakdown. Actually, there was a recap thing that I wanted to touch on. And then what happened is I started sliding around and I couldn't quite find it. Where did it go? There's been so many things to keep up on. Where is it? Let me put on a little bit of DJ Zed music. No, actually, you know what? We'll call this the end of episode. Read the indictment if you haven't. His own words caught on tape because he likes to record conversations that he's having, where he literally says the opposite of what he's telling his base in his own screwball comedy, quirky Trumptopian fashion. And I say that because he's a very particular kind of communicator. And much will be said in analysis of it in the coming years, decades, and a century from now. I want the Zeppoverse GMT book series and podcast, in which the podcast, for those of you who don't understand, is my very real opinion about what's actually going on in the world right now, presented to you as that. But also will be a MacGuffin in the book series, because the book series happens in various settings up to and including 100 years from now, and I think 1,000 years from now, in which there becomes a giant empire inspired by an extension of the topsy-turvy, upside-down, irrational logic at the very center of the Trumptopian movement. And it's a movement that needs to be healed away. Like, it needs to be spotlighted, held to account, called out for what it is, and facilitated into recovery. Because we're talking about our fellow human beings, our brothers, sisters in humanity. We are all part of a big interconnected family of the same species. And this national nation statisty intellectual sports that we call politics has gotten to a place where its toxicity and its casual invocation of politicized and political violence is unacceptable. Unless you really want to vote for that roller coaster ride of returning to the depths of things like empires run by people like Caligula. And oh, the irony that there are Trump supporters praising this twice indicted, twice impeached would-be felon, and doing so with CGI rendered, postage stamp meme bases of him in Caligula armor. The comedy, friends, the comedy. It's epic, and it inspires in me some mind-blowingly crazy, epic scaled, like tales of warning of like, let's not let things spiral out of control until they become the dystopian future that they could become. But I digress. If he did these deeds, bottom line, friends, to put no finer point to it, is that we sit on the precipice of finding out whether or not he will be arraigned. There's a couple of different ways that could pan out, but he could be taken into custody if the DOJ is so inclined, because that's one thing you could do when arraigning and after an indictment, in order to ensure that the person under indictment appears in court when necessary. Sidebar, although and of course her name just fell away. Insert the correct name of the Trump-appointed judge, a young woman by the name of, insert her name here, because it is just completely, I had it on the tip of my tongue and it's gone. Forgive me, it's not a disrespect. It's got nothing to do, that's the way I can see her face in my mind. In my mind's eye, I'm seeing her in the portrait that they often use when they reference her in the news. But I cannot for the life of me remember her name. Mostly because Spiro Thompson Agnew is stuck in my head right now. And that's both for comedy's sake, because there is some light satire and comedy invoked here on this show, but also just really the way my brain works. But she, given her history, given the fact she's literally a Trump appointee, right? Because, woe is me, the pearl clutching, the witch huntery, it's so unjust. I'm sorry, friends. Like, the quickest way to shut that down, for those of you who do not know and are curious, all of this argumentation coming from the right and from Trump himself, that he is being unjustly persecuted by the system, is really hard to buy, because the justice system is run by Republicans. The FBI is primarily staffed by Republican appointees, the vast majority of whom are Republicans. Judges in the court system, from the Supreme Court down, are not all of them Republicans and not all of them appointed by Republicans, but holy dough, can you believe it? In this case, not in today's arraignment, but moving forward from then on, a Trump-appointed judge will be handling it. No joke. You couldn't have written this 20 years ago as science fiction, and they would, except for the people who knew about that book about Baron Trump's desire to be president book series from the 1800s. No one would take you seriously. If I had tried to write this the year before Trump converted, I love to remind them all, converted from being a full-time Democrat, who two-facedly gave to both parties on and off in donations, political donations. But I digress, right? Like, this case is going to be, even with that, and she should recuse, is the point I was driving at. Whatever her name is, forgive me, in the next episode I'll have her name pulled up. Hold on. No, I want to do her justice, because I want to pay her respect. Name of Trump appointed judge. Okay, I think that'll get me. There we go. Aileen Cannon, yes. Trump appointee, randomly assigned to the documented case. There's nothing new. That story news broke 2 days ago. It's been reported by various outlets. It is now officially common knowledge. Aileen Cannon. I am of the opinion, and I agree with the camp, whoever they are, whether they're left, and there are plenty of people on the right saying this is the case. Because like you can't cry and complain of being mistreated and then get your case put in the friendliest judge you ever appointed. And then again, it's already there. History will make of that whatever it will. If she does not recuse, if the DOJ does not file a motion for her to recuse, I wouldn't be surprised if she kicks off the case and then fumbles the ball and screws the pooch so badly. Pardon my French. Does that even qualify as French? I don't think so. So badly, right? If she like does some like, oh my God, come on, lady, how can you? That's just favoritism, right? The DOJ has to file a motion, and then she's like sort of forcibly recused. The dangerous edge of all of it, friends, the bottom downbeat not to be, it's the thing that's staring us all in the face. Pins on the corkboard about so much of this we've already discussed on the show. But the irresponsibility of the provocateurship of it all. The weaving of the mythology that has got some people over there on that camp in that live in the thickest mental accoutrement, accumulation of the many sometimes asynchronous and incompatible concepts that are all being mushed together in this ideological woven Trojan horse that is Trumptopian ideology, this Trumptopian movement in America today. That it's just chomping at the bit. Some people are, and it is not an exaggeration to say, because of it's the pattern that's already, and no matter how much some of them, there are choruses of the people that are, subscribers of or followers of or believers in Donald Trump that like have ascribed for themselves the responsibility of being the deniers. They're going to deny any of the things, the concerning facts, the realities on the ground that are brought up in any argumentation, in any discussion. But those tactics are not valid in a court of law. And will not win the case. And the problem is, those have become hyper-normalized. Lo and behold, here's the crux of it. Because those are some of the idiosyncratic ways in which Trump is shady. It's why he used to be called in the 90s and 80s and 70s Teflon Don. Long before he was, and it's something that they sort of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, pretend they don't know what it means, but also take some giggly pride in knowing what it means. It's that he would skirt the law, which is what try to get away with breaking it. That's what that means. Try to get away with breaking it. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Claim that no nary a law was broken. But his legal tactics we've discussed before on the show. His fundamental lack of ideology as ideology, we've discussed on the show before in various forms and from various angles of attack. And the fundamental problem with the sort of added on attribution to some sort of vague, pseudo-religious, white ethno-nationalist, fake Christian religious zealotry that's been tacked on, and or part of the weaving from the get-go, is categorically un-American, as good old Theodore Roosevelt pointed out at the top of the show. As always, friends, thank you for listening. That's what I got to say today. We'll be back for more. And I invite you, for those of you who may be new to the show, explore the many dimensions of this podcast in as many different ways as you like. But the simplest way is to go to Spreaker.com/show/Zencast. Sorry. No, I did that the old way and not the new way. It's, hang on. Let me erase in the style of that stand-up comedian whose face and voice I can hear in the theatricum of my mind and imagination, but whose name I cannot say with my mouth for reasons that I lament, just the way my brain works. He would just go, erase, 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 in the most cutest way. If you go to Sprecher, that's SPREAKER.com/user/Mr. Zeppo, you can dip your toes into and or take deep dives and fully explore the many dimensions of this podcast, including the part that explains how it's a MacGuffin inside of the Zeppoverse book series of science fiction, action, adventure, pseudo-futuristic spirituality. By visiting all the different, the shows of many shows. ZWP, the Zeppoverse World Building Project, unauthorized explicit readings, Today's Nugget of Zen, the original Umbrella stream, the almost daily Zencast, and of course, the one you're currently listening to here and now, GMT, Good Morning Trumptopia, going all the way back to the earliest recordings, and hopefully if we can someday find and or recover and or reconstitute the misplaced, lost, and or missing files, you'll see that I was indeed ahead of the curve in my own way, calling out the nonsense from the get-go, long before any of the supposed Trump derangement syndrome going on. Because rational thinking and straight-up facts of history, folks, this dude was never in abiding like the dude might be, is asked to be, not to make a cross-reference to dudism and the Big Lebowski, but this gentleman, aspiring for political power, not for the greater good, not for the broader freedom of mankind, not for upholding truth, justice, and the American way, not for honoring the red, white, and blue, not for supporting the troops, not for empowering the little guy or defending the little guy, but for the stereotypical classical inversion of all those promises into empty claims of political manipulation and the malarkey, shenanigan, fraudulent, profiteering driven fundraising off of that, and getting away with the literal attempt to steal the one thing that you get privileged access to when you are at that high level of office, which is national security documents and the things that would put the very people that they claim to support, the troops out there in the world, supposedly fighting the good fight. Now, there's a whole discussion to be had about that, of course. But this guy went and did exactly the thing. His own words prove it, and I should come back and do it. Maybe should we play it now? If you'd read the indictment, and if you haven't, he literally says he calls out these documents that he's waving around as secret, as classified. Then says, I can't declassify them. Could have while being in office, can't anymore. I'm not getting the wording exactly right because I don't have that document in front of me. But anyone who's been really seriously open-mindedly cognizant of realities and aware with just basic civics, level understanding of what is and is not true, the Presidential Records Act does not allow you to just take whatever you want. That is a hyperbolic exaggeration and falsification of how to interpret that rule, and you can go check that for yourself. But he also, he made things worse for himself by, while he was in office, quite weirdly and curiously, making the legal implications and ramifications of the very act that he's being charged by stiffer. The penalty's worse, more stiff, more manly. And he ran on in quite the duplicitous, hypocritical way on the importance of protecting this kind of documentation. And as we have before in the past, we will take the privilege of playing just a 40-second soundbite of a quote of his that just has managed to age oh so delightfully well, that has been reported and captured for history and posterity by many an outlet, and I mean no infringement. But this transcends all things because it's like that important moment in history, especially if, God forbid, knock on wood, I hope to promote the peaceful observation of everyone's opinions and the allowance for protest, but not the triggering of any sort of a violent action on the street to the point of broaching this crazy call for civil war. That is unconscionable. And I cannot abide by that kind of aggression, and I will not stand by and let that sort of thing be talked about without calling it out as immoral and un-American and irresponsible, especially done by someone as two-faced and duplicitous and manipulatively and obviously toxic. And while, yes, worthy of the legal respect of being considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, soon to be, I'm sure, be proven to be guilty in a court of law because he's got a really bad track record already going into it, all of this, of being proven guilty in a court of law. And in courts of law dominated by Republican conservatism. Not robots from outer space, not Jewish space lasers, not ghosts from Atlantis, not baby-eating lizards, not not any of the vilifications that get thrown at the left. Not that I'm blindly defending the left. Just listen to what this thing that just this quote of, and we'll end the show on this. Which one is it? There's two of them on here. This one's, I think, the one that we want to play. Way back on July 11th, 2016, Donald J. Trump said the following on live television, which was broadcast on almost all the major networks.
This was not just extreme carelessness with classified material, which is still totally disqualifying. This is calculated, deliberate, premeditated misconduct, followed by a cover-up that included false statements and lies to Congress, the media, and the American people.
It's almost as if he's predicting his own behavior in the Mar-a-Lago documents case. Oh, the quotes that age so well. There's a certain surrealism to it, folks. Because he was hyperbolically and falsely accusing... That statement was made as part of a cornucopia. A massive and like logoreic verbosity. Like the man is blessed with the ability to just speak ad nauseum, for better or worse. And he could be doing it for good things, one could argue. And he does himself pretend, but for a person who claimed that he alone could fix everything that was wrong with our government, he neither did fix very much at all, and arguably made several things worse. Did a few things that I guess I really can't disagree with, but very few. And then didn't do so much. Never once did he actually follow through on Infrastructure Week, for example. And so many other things. Pins on corkboards all over the place. But as I was talking about in another episode, and is worthy of its own episode, really, but the weaponization of hyper-vilification and false accusation, right? This man is now claiming victimhood and talking about a witch hunt, and he spent 5 years getting people to rapidly chant "lock her up," right? Because he was going to just throw her in jail and slam her in jail and throw away the key. And yet he never once did any of the steps required to actually present evidence or in an organized fashion. Hyperbolic, saber rattling, etc. But this quote is uncanny because no matter how you slice it, that's exactly what's at issue here in this indictment. And I can't predict the future. And I'm not a betting man, not really. Never have I really, except for a very particular bet about my own ability to do or actually not do something for various periods of time, which is counterintuitive, especially if you listen to the podcast. But we'll save that for another day of discussion. The only time I ever have made bets and won them is when people, and some say that if they listen to the podcast, they would say that I'm hustling, but I have been challenged to prove that I could not talk for extended periods of time, like silly ones, And the very first time, which inspires this storytelling, when we were children, riding a bus, anyways, the odds that Donald Trump will be found guilty in this court of law of the things in this indictment, I think, are strong. It is very likely. And there is a second issue for which there will likely be a strong indictment because Mr. Smith? Jack Smith? That's his name. Yes, I'm terrible at names. I can see his beardy face with the black and purple robe, but I'm totally concerned. The special prosecutor is not done with that portion. That's a separate investigation, right? This is the way our system works. The special prosecutor is appointed there, and the fullness of that process of presenting the facts as available through evidence to an impaneled grand jury of 12 citizens tasked with the business of reviewing the evidence as presented and applying rational, critical thinking skills. We'll have to decide then whether or not an indictment will drop. And there's probably a third one coming. Now, presumed innocent until proven guilty in the court of law. But we come full circle, friends. Not to sound repetitive, but the pattern is what the pattern is. And we tried to warn y'all in real time. And that is the latest madness from behind the orange wall. I totally should. I should re-record this outro because I don't like the sound of orange wall anymore. Doesn't make sense. There is no wall, but you can imagine a time where there might be. Well, it does make sense because of all the hubbub about building the wall, the fraudulent fundraiser that never really was going to go towards actually any of that, and the exaggerations about whether or not he built a wall or not. We'll see. At any rate, I'll leave you to it, friends. Go and think for yourselves, but do it based on facts and not hyperbolic, hyper-vilifying, pseudo-religious, neurolinguistic riddled Trumptopian harble-jarble, because the man is a known slinger of shade and nonsense. Don't believe me? Check out his court record. Going back 40 years. Peace, yo.